Fluttershy. Let's do some gaming. Darn it. Fall in that hole every time, Fluttershy. You know, you could probably do better than me. Anyways, today, Sega Master System, the Master of Darkness. It's kind of like Sega's response to Castlevania. You get that really gritty, grimy, gothic tone, but instead of being the medieval castle, it's more old London, you know, kind of that gothic feel of... What the hell? What are you doing here? Oh yeah, I know Dark Souls. Speaking of Dark Souls, great game series. Dark Souls 2, Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1. Love them. I platinumed them all on the PlayStation because I'm awesome. Just need the beat set. Anyways, why are you talking about Dark Souls? I'm reviewing a Sega game. This is way decades ahead of its time. Duh! You don't need to invade me. You could just ask if you could play. You know, you don't have to invade. You really need to watch out with that invading stuff. You get your sin counter too high, then the blue phantoms will start coming at you. But yeah, here you can play. You can play. It's cool. Oh man, you're doing good.
It's no secret I have a fascination with the macabre. I mean, growing up in the 80s, seeing films like Nightmare on Elm Street or basically anything Tim Burton ever did, listening to bands like the Sisters of Mercy or The Wake, or even later on bands like Nosferatu. I love that gothic feel. And there was only one game that really captured that as a child, and that of course was Castlevania. Now, I didn't really play these as a kid, but my neighbor, who's actually the one who got me into video games, her older brother would always rent the Castlevania games from our local Quick Star as it was in Iowa. And I just loved watching him play this. And it became this fascination for me. It had that gothic look to it, but it was more of a medieval gothic look, when I prefer more of a Victorian sort of gothic feel to it. Little did I know, there was actually a game that had that more Victorian goth feel to it. But the weird thing is, it's sort of a lost chapter in the Castlevania franchise. And seriously, people ask, what's your favorite Castlevania game? A lot of people will say Castlevania 3 or Super Castlevania 4, which are kind of tied for my favorite. Of course, Symphony of the Night is a masterpiece. And the nice thing about that is Symphony of the Night and Castlevania 3 really do play off each other well as being sequels. But my favorite is this Lost Chapter game. Which game is that? I am, of course, talking about the one and only Master of Darkness for the Sega Master System. Well, not really one and only. This also appeared as Vampire Master of Darkness on the Sega Game Gear. But this isn't just, the answer to Castlevania on the Master System. Sure, you had games like Golden Axe Warrior that would take the place of something like Legend of Zelda or Phantasy Star instead of Final Fantasy. So of course you had to have something to go with Castlevania. But it does more than that. As I said, it's sort of a lost chapter, and I will defend why. As my nephew stated before, this game takes place in Old London. It's not Transylvania, you're in England. Well, the final act of the game does take place in Transylvania, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. The game stars Dr. Ferdinand Solschen. I just need to pause on this name for a minute. Let me just say that slowly. Dr. Ferdinand Solschen. That's a name that says, I'm an old-timey badass guy, but I'm also real kindly and a good old-fashioned gentleman. And Dr. Solshen's a parapsychologist, and one night messing around with his Ouija board, he gets a message that strange things are afoot in London. Now this whole Ouija board aesthetic is something that I really like. I mean, I love my talking boards. But here in the game, it's more than just move the plot along. In fact, whenever you get a game over, it'll actually show the board, spelling out game over, and then asking if you want to continue. You have to select yes or no from the board. Things like this, I love them. But in this case, I'm in love with it. Of course, Dr. Solschen is Dr. Solschen. He's not a Belmont, he's not a Morris, he's not even a member of the Tepes family. He's Dr. Ferdinand Solschen. So he doesn't have anything like the vampire killer or fancy armor or magic swords. In fact, you start the game with nothing more than a pocket knife. But you do get some pretty upgrades, including a cane. Well, me and James Gruesome have been for years saying it's a cane. It even looks like one of my canes. It's this huge, long thing, and the way he thrusts it out, it looks like a cane. Of course, the manual says it's a stake, but there's a few things in the manual that I don't quite agree with. For example, you can get a sword later on in the game that the manual says is a saber. Of course, it's got a huge basket hilt, and it's more of a straight edge. You could maybe say it was a cutlass, given how short it is, and that you couldn't really make that little curve of the blade that a cutlass has, but the overextended curve of a saber, it's definitely not. Or it could be a basket hilt rapier for all I know. We're just going to call it the sword. Of course, my favorite weapon is the axe. It's short, but it'll annihilate anything in almost one hit. And that's the thing. You want the axe or the cane. The sword is a little too slow, and the pocket knife does almost no damage, and you're going to get yourself killed real fast if that's all you're using. And what would any Castlevania game be without the sub-weapons? But this game has its own take on them. Like, instead of the knife, you have a gun. I kind of like that Dr. Solschen's actually packing a pistol in this. And then you also have things like a bomb, which kind of takes the place of the holy water, but also at the same time the throwing axe. It moves in an arc like the axe, but it explodes, and that explosion can damage enemies just like the holy water. So Dr. Solschen isn't totally ill-equipped, he just started his journey that way with nothing more than a pocket knife. Weapons and power-ups are found not from hidden candlesticks, but in this case these floating Venetian masks. It's familiar yet different, though sometimes you can break apart different walls to find some health power-ups. These come in the form of a potion, not a pork chop. Now I said that the manual has some few inconsistencies that I disagree with, like the weapons, but the game does too. Like the first end boss is this guy jumping around all over you, and the game credits him as being Jack the Ripper. And I like that they take this idea of Jack the Ripper's killing all these people in an effort to spill the blood and help bring back the resurrection of Dracula. But with the way he's constantly jumping around, I always felt this was supposed to be the urban legend of Spring-Heeled Jack. Well, they're both characters named Jack who have haunted London. Maybe it's a translation error, maybe I'm wrong on this, I just feel like it's supposed to be Spring-Heeled Jack and not Jack the Ripper, but that's a small point. The second level takes place in a wax museum. I love this idea of this wax museum. I mean, that's sort of this classic horror location that you don't see used too much anymore. The idea is that they have figures made out of wax that look very lifelike and reminiscent of famous people. So in this game, you've got these wax figures in the background, and many of them will come to life and attack you. The boss of this level is credited simply as the Psychic Girl, but when you get to her, she's wearing this really fancy and elegant gown, and she says something along the lines of fresh blood. Seems like a strange thing for a Psychic Girl to say, but I have a feeling this is actually meant to be Elizabeth Bathory, or possibly even Camilla, but for whatever reason, the game creditors put her in as the Psychic Girl at the last minute. Anybody who's playing a game like this would be very familiar with the stories of Elizabeth Bathory or the novel Camilla, so why they didn't just go with that, I have no idea. This again goes with the inconsistencies I kind of find in the manual. It's not a big deal, but for purposes of playing, just tell yourself it's Elizabeth Bathory. There's one more thing I want to nitpick about. It's the soundtrack to the game. It's not that great. There's nothing like Bloody Tears or Vampire Killer in this one. Well, I don't even really remember it. And the funny thing is, as I was driving to my location to film this video, I actually had the soundtrack for this game playing off of my phone in the car, and honestly, still don't remember it. It's kind of meh. It's not horrible by any means, but you're not going to be humming these tunes later on. And that brings me to my final point of this video. You get a game that looks like Castlevania with this gothic atmosphere. Again, it's Victorian and not medieval, which is what the 8-bit Castlevania games were doing, but it still has that gothic look and feel to it. You've got weapons and sub-weapons, much like Castlevania did. You've got Dracula. You actually fight in Dracula's castle, or a small portion of it towards the end of the game. And here's what ties it all together, why I'm saying Master of Darkness is sort of a lost chapter in the Castlevania franchise. After defeating the game's final villain, it tells you that Dr. Social meets up with his good friend Jonathan Harker. That's right, from the novel Dracula. And Mr. Harker is the one who gives Dr. Social directions from Transylvania back to England. Well, many of you may not know this, but I'm sure many of you also do know this because you're probably fans of the Castlevania franchise if you're watching this video. The events of Bram Stoker's Dracula are considered canon within the Castlevania timeline. They would also be considered canon within the timeline of the game Master of Darkness. Dr. Social is sort of the unsung hero of the Castlevania franchise. Nobody seems to really remember what he did. It really did happen in the darkness, so to speak. But at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, Master of Darkness is easily one of the best games on the Master System. If you're a fan of Castlevania, or you just have a flair for the Gothic like myself, this is definitely a title you don't want to miss. So, emulate it, buy yourself a copy, however you want to go about this, that's up to you. But no matter what, you need to play Master of Darkness.